Red dust choked the air as the foreman's gaze raked over Nusi. "Kitchen help," he sneered, shoving her toward the auction block. The canvas tent reeked of sweat and fear. Just until dawn, she thought, clutching the hidden engineer's requisition slip. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the coming storm. The ground was hard with frozen mud, the air bitter. Fires flickered low in rusty barrels, and the smell of coal smoke and sweat hung like a second sky. The Stratton Ridge mining camp wasn't a place people arrived at by choice. It was where broken men dug through the earth for silver veins and stayed long enough to forget their names. And it was where Nose, 19, daughter of wind and wild prairie, had been brought under cover of night. She wore no shackles. None were needed. The look in the guard's eyes said enough. She was not there as a worker. She was property temporary, replaceable. There were no women in the camp, not officially. Those who appeared were labeled kitchen help, but everyone knew the code. The tent she was pushed into was empty, just a cot, a basin of murky water, and a tattered blanket. She did not sit. She did not sleep. She stood staring at the canvas walls as the cold gnawed at her bones. At some point, a low conversation passed outside. "She's marked for dawn. Foreman says first pick. No froze." She moved quietly to the flap of the tent, just enough to peer out. One of the guards held a clipboard. On it, a crude list of names. She saw hers one. No, kitchen personal selection. Her breath caught. She had until morning. She waited until the fires dimmed and the camp settled into drunk stillness. Then she slipped barefoot across the frozen dirt, ducking between wagons and shadow. She knew where she needed to go. The far side of camp held the engineer's tent. Larger, reinforced with wood slats and flanked by stacked crates of surveying equipment. The man inside was said to be important, and more importantly, not cruel. Thomas Beckett, 34, widower hour. Rumors called him strange, a man who talked to no one, who drank little, who still wore his wedding ring under his gloves. She crouched outside the tent for a long time, debating. Then she pushed open the flap. Inside, the air was warm. Dim lamplight spilled over drafting maps and tools. Thomas sat at a table, his back to her, scribbling on a long scroll with quiet precision. He wore a gray flannel shirt, rolled to the elbows, his sleeves stained with oil and soot. No stepped inside, her voice small but clear. "Sir?" He turned slightly, surprised, his brow furrowed. She dropped to her knees. "They'll sell me at dawn," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I can cook so clean. I will be anything you need." Thomas rose slowly. He studied her, not with hunger, not with anger, but confusion. He looked at her as if unsure she was real. She kept going, desperate. "You do not have to touch me. I will stay out of your way. I cannot go to them. Please." The silence stretched. Then Thomas stepped forward. He crouched down in front of her. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Nusi." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I am not one of them," he said. "I know." He stood again, walked to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a pad of forms. Requisition slips for camp labor assignments. He filled one in slowly, carefully. Name, no. Assignment, personal camp assistant, engineering division. Signature, T. Beckett. Then he took the camp seal from his belt, a heavy brass stamp, and pressed it into the bottom corner of the paper. He turned back to her and held it out. "Stay here tonight," he said. "No one will touch you?" Naka took the paper with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas didn't respond. He returned to his table, sat down, and resumed writing. But something in his shoulders shifted, a tension released, a wall lowered, and for the first time in a long time, he wrote slower, as if something had changed the weight of the ink. The morning after, the camp stirred with the usual noise, boots crunching gravel, metal clanking, men shouting orders with the sharpness of routine. But in the far corner, near the engineer's tent, something had changed. Thomas Beckett stood in front of the administrative shack, the requisition slip in his hand. The foreman, a grizzled man with a permanent scowl, looked at it through narrowed eyes. "Personal assistant? Since when does a damn engineer need one?" Thomas shrugged. Since the survey reports are 3 weeks behind and my tent looks like a mining accident, I need someone to help catalog equipment and maintain order? Unless you would rather do it, huh? The foreman grunted. You vouch for her? I do. A long pause. Then the stamp hit the paper with a thud. That afternoon, Nikos moved into the side of the tent Thomas partitioned with a woolen curtain. No one said anything aloud, but looks followed her across the camp. Curiosity, contempt, envy. A Comanche girl assigned to the white engineer's private quarters. The whispers were inevitable. Inside the tent, the space was functional but worn. Drafting tables, crates of copper wire, broken lamps, and layers of dust coated everything like ash after a fire. A single cot sat unmade in the corner. A bottle of whiskey lay empty beside it. No did not ask permission. She simply rolled up her sleeves and began. She swept first, then opened the tent flaps to let in air. She folded his laundry, refilled his water canteen, scrubbed soot from the metal stove. By evening, her hands were cracked and blackened, but the tent looked human again. Lived in, breathing. When Thomas returned, he stood silently in the entrance for a long moment. The bottle was gone, the floor swept, his cot made. He walked past her without a word and sat down. Noose stayed quiet as well. She moved to the small iron pot she had placed over the stove earlier and spooned out a stew, modest but fragrant, made from salted meat and wild roots she had traded from another worker. He placed the bowl on the table without looking at him. Thomas took one bite, then another. He ate slowly, methodically until the bowl was clean. Only then did Nakosa turn toward the corner shelf. There, tucked beneath a dusty handkerchief, she had found a small tin box while cleaning. She picked it up gently, as if it still held breath. She opened it and showed him the contents. An old photograph faded by time and heat. A young woman in a summer dress, printed with tiny sunflowers. Her smile was soft, her hand resting on the arm of a younger Thomas. Noose met his eyes, then closed the box and returned it to the shelf. I did not mean to intrude, she said quietly. Thomas did not speak for a long time. Then he nodded once. She made that stew years ago. I guessed, Nico replied. The silence between them changed. It was no longer a barrier, but a space they both sat in, a space neither of them knew how to leave, nor wished to just yet. That night, Thomas set aside his papers early. He did not drink. He turned the lamp lower than usual, the glow softer against the canvas walls. And when Noosh lay down behind the curtain, she stared up at the ceiling for a long time, hearing the stillness in the man on the other side. He had not thanked her, but he had eaten every bite. Days bled into each other with the rhythm of routine. Nikos did not speak unless spoken to. She rose early, stoked the stove, prepared coffee, and folded the engineer's maps when the wind scattered them across the table. She scrubbed out the iron pans until her knuckles cracked and stitched a tear in Thomas's shirt without being asked. Her movements were efficient, quiet, the kind that learned long ago how to disappear into usefulness. She took up no more space than needed, left no footprint behind. Thomas, for his part, said little. He offered no thanks, no questions, only silence and the occasional nod. But something shifted. He drank less. He lit the lamp earlier, and sometimes after supper, he would sit outside the tent and simply listen to the wind, to the stillness, to the small sounds of someone else sharing his world. The silence between them became less like distance, more like the hush of something beginning to thaw. One morning, while sorting through old cloth in a supply crate, Nico found a strip of canvas too torn to patch. The edges were frayed, the center stained. Instead of discarding it, she took a piece of charcoal from the stove bin and began to draw. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, but she moved with purpose, not precision. It was not exact. The lines were uneven, but in the center a rough sunflower bloomed, round, radiant, a burst of stubborn gold against faded gray. That evening, when Thomas returned from the shaft inspection, he saw the fabric tacked to the canvas wall beside his bed. He paused. His eyes lingered on the flower longer than he realized. He said nothing. He did not remove it. The next day passed without mention of it. But that night, while Noose stirred stew over the fire, Thomas spoke for the first time in days. Why a sunflower? She looked at him surprised. Then she shrugged slightly. They follow the sun even when the sky is full of smoke. Thomas sat down across from her, watching the flames. My wife, her family grew them, he said. In Missouri, acres of them. She wore them in her hair. Nico said nothing. She merely passed him his bowl. After a long pause, he added, She died 3 years ago. There was a raid. The militia said it was Comanche, but I never saw who fired the first shot. The cabin burned. I found her in the ash. I am sorry, Nakos whispered. Thomas looked at the bowl in his hands, then away. Since then, I have not built anything that did not break. I thought maybe if I buried myself in the dirt long enough, I would forget what the sun looked like. No stirred the pot again slowly. My mother was sold, she said softly, by a man who said he would marry her. He traded her to a passing caravan. I was 5. She told me to hide under a pile of skins. I never saw her again. She did not cry when she said it. She stared into the fire like it was the only thing that had ever stayed. I have been to many places, she continued, but never a home. For a moment neither spoke. The wind moved outside, brushing the tent flaps. The sunflower on the wall trembled, like it too was listening. Thomas finished his stew in silence. When he was done, he placed the bowl aside and stood. He paused by the curtain that separated their sleeping spaces. The canvas is yours, he said. You do not have to ask permission to hang what you draw. Then he stepped behind the curtain and disappeared into the dark. That night, Nakos lay on her cot and stared at her drawing. The flower was crude, its petals jagged, its stem crooked, but it was there, still standing, still facing what little light there was. And for the first time, it felt like something she had planted had taken root. The mess tent wire of grease and sweat, thick with a noise of boots, scraping wooden floors, and tin cups clanging on benches. Most of the miners had been drinking since sundown, celebrating a new silver vein struck near Shaft 3. The laughter was loud, laced with something meaner than joy. No kept her head down as she scrubbed a cast-iron pot in the corner. Her fingers burned from the heat, the back of her neck prickled. She felt him before she heard him. A miner, broad-shouldered, sweat-stained, eyes red with liquor, leaned into her space, breath sour and hot. Well, now look at this. The Comanche flower they gave to the engineer. Must be nice, huh? Sleeping your way into a tent like that. No didn't respond. He grabbed her wrist. I asked you a question. I am not yours, she said evenly, trying to pull away. The room quieted as others turned to watch. Some laughed. A few looked uneasy. No one moved. The man twisted her arm harder. Noose winced. You think you're better than us, hiding behind that pretty boy Beckett? Then before she could react, he shoved her back against the table. Pots crashed. The basin spilled. Noose gasped as the miner pressed closer, snarling. That was when the iron shovel hit him. Thomas had come through the side entrance, silent as snowfall. The blow landed clean across the man's back. Not enough to kill, but enough to send him crashing to the floor with a howl. He tried to rise. Thomas brought the shovel down again once hard across the elbow. There was a sickening crack. The miner screamed. Chaos erupted. Some men shouted. One ran to fetch the foreman. Kama stood over the crumpled body, chest heaving. His eyes were dark, unblinking. The shovel hung loosely in his hands, its edge smeared with blood. Nakoso stood frozen, hair clinging to her damp face, breath shallow. Later, inside the administrative shack, the mine sheriff and 2 company men circled Thomas like wolves. He stood still, arms folded, eyes straight ahead. He was drunk, Thomas said. He grabbed her. I responded. You broke his damn arm, the sheriff snapped. Hell still be able to dig, Thomas replied. Eventually, do not get clever with me, Beckett. You think this is a city? You are not some union officer anymore. You cannot just lay a man out because you feel like playing hero. Thomas remained silent. One of the supervisors leaned forward. You are valuable, Beckett, but no one is irreplaceable, especially not over some camp girl. Thomas met his gaze without flinching. Then fire me. A long silence. Then the sheriff cursed under his breath. Hell with it. You are on warning. One more incident like this. You are gone. No severance. No escort. Thomas nodded once and walked out. Back at the tent, Noah Sai sat on the cot, her hand still shaking, her lip was split. A bruise darkened her jaw. When Thomas stepped inside, she stood quickly. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice small. "They will hate you now." "They already did," Thomas answered. He removed his gloves, placed them neatly on the table, and knelt near the stove to stoke the fire. Nikos turned away, but her eyes stung. "No one ever did that before," she whispered. "No one ever chose me. Not like that." Thomas did not speak. He only nodded. Later that night, after she had fallen asleep, Thomas returned to the cloth Nikosa had drawn on the sunflower she had pinned beside his bed. During the scuffle in the mess tent, it had been ripped from the canvas wall, stepped on, torn along the middle seam. He picked it up gently, brushing away the dirt with careful fingers. He sat at the table by lamplight and began to mend it thread by thread. It took him over an hour. When he was done, he rose quietly, crossed the tent, and rehung the cloth exactly where it had been. The sunflower faced the same direction as before, a little crooked, a little worn, but still standing. The wind rolled down from the ridge that morning, heavy with dust and the bitter sting of frost. Inside the tent, the cot was empty. Thomas noticed first the absence of the sunflower cloth, then the folded blanket on the corner of her bed, then the silence. A silence too hollow, too final. He stepped outside, scanning the trail that led toward the old supply yard. Faint footprints marked the dirt. Light enough to be hers. He followed. It did not take long to find her. Noose was walking fast, hunched against the wind. A small satchel slung across her shoulder, her braid whipped behind her like a tail caught in flight. "No," Thomas called. She stopped but did not turn around. He caught up in a few strides, breath already tight with anger. "Where the hell are you going?" She did not answer right away. Then she said softly, "Back to what?" "To where I came from." "That place was a cage." She faced him now, her eyes clear despite the wind. "It was a debt. I let you carry it when it was mine." Thomas stared at her. "What are you talking about? I was sent here to be traded, used, passed around like a coin. You put your name on paper and stood between me and that fate." She lowered her eyes. "But I should not have let you. I should have left that first night. That venerable, that prominent lawyer remained a stern enemy." His voice dropped low and sharp. "So that is it. You pack up and vanish because you think you owe me something." "I do owe you," she snapped, "and I cannot pay it. Not with cleaning, not with stew, not even with loyalty." Thomas stepped closer. "You think I gave a damn about stew?" She looked away. He gritted his teeth. "You think this was about pity? About saving someone because I had no one left? You should not have to fix broken things again, and you should stop thinking. You're one of them." Noose froze. Thomas's voice broke as he said, "You are not a debt. You are not a burden. You are the only thing in that tent that has not turned to ash." She turned her face and he saw the tears rise. "You made the place feel alive again," he continued. "I come home and there is warmth, a bed that smells like wild sage, a drawing of a flower on the wall that does not know how to give up." "I did not think I was worth staying for," she whispered. He stepped forward slowly until only inches separated them. "You were the first person," he said gently, "who ever made me believe the light might come back." The Kosa's breath caught. He raised a hand, not to touch her, but to show her something. The torn cloth, the sunflower now mended, the seam tight and visible, but the shape still intact. "I fixed this," he said, "because I could not stand the sight of it broken." Her eyes shimmered wide and wet. "Let me fix this too," he said softly, "not because you owe me, but because I do not want you gone." She closed her eyes for a long moment. The wind blew around them, tugging at her sleeves, pulling her back toward a world that had never held her. Then she let the bag fall from her shoulder. Thomas stepped forward and caught her as she folded into his arms. He held her like she was real, like she was not about to disappear, like she was not some temporary kindness in a brutal place. She held him back, not out of gratitude, not because she felt safe, but because for the first time she believed she was allowed to stay. It began with a strange silence. That morning the birds did not sing above the shaft. The wind carried a metallic taste, acrid and unnatural. Noose noticed at first while hanging linens near the edge of the mess tent. She saw a thin line of smoke drifting up from the deepest mouth of the mine. Not like fire, but heavier. Wrong. Inside the shaft, Thomas crouched beside a broken pipe, inspecting a pressure valve with two other engineers. The gauge needle twitched wildly, spinning beyond the red. He barely had time to shout, "Back!" before the explosion hit. A thunderous roar echoed through the tunnels. Gas burst out in a wave of invisible force, sending men to the ground. Cries rang out, loud, panicked, then were swallowed by a hiss as noxious gas filled the passage. Thomas scrambled to his feet. Two men beside him coughed violently, already collapsing. He grabbed the first by the collar, dragging him toward the shaft's mouth. His vision blurred, his lungs burned, but he did not let go. The last thing he saw was the sky turning black at the edges. Noosa heard the explosion and ran. No one stopped her. The guards were too busy sealing off the entrance. A line of smoke snaked from the shaft like a dying breath. She pushed past a knot of men screaming orders and charged into the blackened fog. "Thomas!" she shouted, covering her mouth with her scarf. "Thomas!" She could barely see. Then movement, a body near the edge, limp, face story with ash. She fell to her knees beside him. Thomas. He was barely conscious, one arm limp beneath him, his lips turning pale around them. The hiss of gas grew louder. They had seconds, maybe less. Without thinking, Noose pulled from her satchel the length of hand-woven rope she had braided days ago, meant for gathering firewood. It was coarse, sturdy, and knotted at intervals. She wrapped it beneath his arms, looped the ends over her shoulders, and began to drag. Her muscles screamed. The heat and smoke clawed at her skin, but she grit her teeth and dug her heels into the gravel. Inch by inch, she pulled him away from the shaft. Another tremor shook the ground, a groan from deep below. Rocks cracked. Part of the tunnel collapsed behind them. She did not stop. When they broke into open air, the camp was chaos. Men coughed and pointed. The sheriff ran forward with two others. They tried to take Thomas from her arms. "Get back!" she snarled. "He needs air!" They laid him on the ground. She knelt beside him, pressing his chest, calling his name again and again. "Come back," she whispered. "You do not get to leave me now." His eyelids fluttered. He coughed once, twice, then gasped, pulling in a ragged breath. Makos covered her mouth and sobbed. By sunset, the mine was sealed. The company officials declared it inoperable due to gas damage. 2 men died. Several more were wounded, but the engineers survived, pulled out by a girl no one had ever considered more than a servant. Thomas woke in the infirmary, his head wrapped, his ribs bandaged. Noose sat beside him, her hair caked with dust, hands blistered and raw. He blinked at her through the haze. "You dragged me?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I told you," she whispered, "you do not owe me, but I could not lose you." Thomas reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "You saved me," he said. "No," she said. "We saved each other." A week later, the company offered Thomas a new post far north, near a fertile plain, where a new line would be laid. Safer, cleaner, a chance to rebuild. He looked out the window at the gutted mine, then at Noosh. "Will you come with me?" he asked. She did not answer with words. She only reached for his hand and held it like a promise. 6 months later, the earth was softer. The wind no longer carried the scent of smoke or sulfur. It rolled across the plains like a lullaby, stirring tall grass and sun-warmed air. In the distance, golden stalks swayed in waves, their faces turned toward the sun. The sunflowers had bloomed. Noise stood barefoot at the edge of the field, a canvas bag of seeds slung over her shoulder. She wore a linen apron over her dress, a smear of dirt on her cheek. Her hands were already stained from planting, but she did not care. Her feet sunk slightly into the damp earth, grounding her, steadying her. She dropped to her knees and dug a small trench. With careful fingers, she placed the seeds in the dark soil one by one, then pressed earth over them like tucking children into bed. Each motion was deliberate, sacred in its own way. It was the first time in her life she had ever planted something that was hers. Behind her, Thomas repaired the hinges on the small shed they had rebuilt together. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, collar open, his skin sun-browned from weeks of labor. He worked quietly, methodically, as he always had, but now with a calmness Nakosa had never seen in him back in the mines. There was no heaviness in his shoulders, no smoke in his eyes, only rhythm, only presence. He glanced up when he heard her laugh, a short, surprised burst of joy that rang across the clearing like wind chimes. Noose had just noticed the first sunflower she had planted weeks ago had begun to open. Its petals still curled at the edges, caught the light like fire. She looked back at him and grinned. Not with politeness, not with fear, with wonder. It was the kind of smile only children had, and she had never been allowed to be one. He walked over, knelt beside her in the dirt. "You did that," he said. "I didn't know it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like staying still does not mean being trapped." Thomas reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "You're not trapped." "I know," she said softer. "I think I finally believe it." Their new home was modest. One room, a wood stove, shelves lined with jars of wild honey and dried beans. No painted the windowsills yellow. Thomas carved her name into the doorframe just above his. It was the first time either of them had written something down, not to forget, but to honor. By the river bend, she opened a small teaching shed. She taught local women how to cook with root vegetables and herbs, how to make bone broth and corn cakes, how to stitch broken shirts and embroider meaning into every thread. They called her the Sunflower Girl. Thomas took odd engineering jobs for local farms, helped dig wells and mend broken bridges. He kept his tools in a small crate beside the bed, organized and oiled, but only opened it when truly needed. At night, they sat by the fire, no papers signed, no rings exchanged, only the sound of wind in the fields, and breath and peace. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, Nakos rested her head on his shoulder. "You never asked me to stay," she said. Thomas smiled. "You never needed me to. I still don't. I know." She looked up at him, her eyes the color of riverstone. "But I want to." He kissed her forehead gently, and just like the flowers turning toward light they had never known, they stayed. The light outside the window was golden, soft as a whisper. It spilled across the wooden floorboards of their small home, catching dust motes midair like glitter trapped in honey. It warmed the journal that lay open on Thomas's lap, its pages curled slightly at the edges from use, from breath, from time. He sat by the window in the old oak chair Noisy had found at the trading post. The legs creaked slightly under his weight, but it had become his place where the wind spoke through the cracks in the pane, where the sunflower curtain fluttered gently like a heartbeat. On the desk beside him, a half-finished mug of tea cooled slowly, the steam rising and curling in the last light of the day. He held a pencil between stained fingers, strong, steady, but tender now in ways they never used to be. He wrote slowly, the strokes careful, deliberate. Each word was measured, as if he feared breaking the silence with anything untrue. "They said you were a girl they could sell, but you were the fire that made ashes bloom again. Who said you'd be anything I needed, but all I ever needed was someone who stayed." He paused and looked out the window. The field beyond was alive, a sea of sunflowers swaying in the breeze, their golden heads bobbing gently as if nodding in agreement. They had started as Nakosa's quiet rebellion, planted one seed at a time in the ashes of a past neither of them wanted. Now they stretched to the horizon. Behind him, footsteps approached, soft, sure. Noose entered, holding a bowl of roasted squash and sage. She placed it beside him, her movement graceful, practiced. Then she leaned against the window frame, her eyes falling on the open journal. "You are writing again," she said. Thomas nodded, not looking away from the view. "You told me not to let my hands forget how." She smiled slow and full of something unspoken. "And are your hands remembering?" "They are," he said, "but they're not writing about the mines anymore." She moved closer, lowering herself to the floor beside him, resting her head gently against his knee. "I never thought I'd have a place to return to," she said quietly. "A place that waited for me, a stove, a name on the door, a man who smells like soil and sun." He looked down at her, brushing a callous thumb across her cheek. "And now," she whispered, "I know. Wherever there is you and flowers and firewood stacked by the door, that is where I bloom. Thank you for walking with us through the dust, the danger, and the quiet triumph of Palapaki and Nu. A love story born not from ease, but from endurance. From a girl they tried to sell to a woman who made a man remember what light felt like. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a hope, a reminder that love does not always arrive loud, but sometimes in the form of someone who simply stays, then we have more stories to share. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every week we bring you tales of devotion, redemption, and the kind of love that grows even from ash. Tap that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who still believes home is not a place but a person. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and keep your heart open to stories that stir the soul.